I'm Angela Clark with Threadwaggle Quilting. Today we're going to talk about how to thread your APQS machine. We're going to be talking about both threading with a thread break sensor and without one. Depending on what you're doing that day, you may be using either one. So let's get started. So today I'm working on a Lenni, and it does have Quilt Path installed on it. So we are going to be talking about how to thread a machine both with and without a thread break sensor. Now, I just realized that my machine that I have right now, the Quilt Path that is installed on it came in for a Freddy or a Millie that would have an onboard thread break sensor. So I'm going to need to insert some pictures later when we start talking about thread break sensors to explain what I'm trying to do, but I want to go ahead and show you how to thread the machine so that you know what you're doing to start out with. So we're going to start out here on the back of the machine, and I'm just going to break my thread right here so that we can talk about this as we're going, and we're going to rethread the machine. We're going to start back here with your thread guide that is directly above your cone. So you're going to put your new cone on. Most of the time I just put my cone on. I would tie the two ends I just broke together and pull my thread through, because once the machine is threaded, I don't have to rethread the machine very often. This is for those moments that you're either putting on a different type of thread, so you need to understand where the wraps go, or if you are having a lot of tension issues and you think that your machine may have become unthreaded. First thread guide needs to be, the bottom of the U on the bottom of this thread guide needs to be directly over the spindle for your cone holder. And what happens is this gets knocked around all over the place. Even at my showroom, if I walk in at any given day, I'll find them up here for some reason, this all the way back, you know, the back of it pointed this direction. Anytime I'm having a tension issue and I'm trying to figure out what's going on, the first place I look is this thread guide to make sure the U is directly over my cone, which means when my thread is spooling off, it's going to spool around the U and it's going to be very smooth. There's going to be no extra tension put on by this particular guide. Now, if I was on a Millie or a Millie 30 using glide thread, I would also take a little like 1-inch piece of batting. This is just 100% cotton batting that I have. I have it folded in half. I'm actually going to fold it one more time so it's folded in quarters and slide it right into the top of this. All this is going to do is prevent my thread from being able to kick out of here if I've got a lot of whip going down the machine. Or if I need a little bit to reduce the amount of bounce that I'm seeing or whip going down the machine, I can very gently pull this down towards the thread itself. Now, this piece is really small that I used. Probably should have done slightly bigger than I did, but I would just bring it down until it was just barely touching the thread when it's running. In this case, I don't need it that much, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it and just pull it inside the teeth, or inside that little opening so that my thread can't come out at all. Okay, so now I have one piece of thread. It is going from the back through the front because I'm threading in that direction. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get to the 3-hole guide. So I'm going to pull this back just a little bit so the 3-hole guide is centered. 3-hole guide is right here. Okay, so this is the star of the show right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull this thread way out of the machine. So I'm just going to pull it all the way out. So it is no longer threaded at all. And I'm going to start from back here on the 3-hole guide. Now, how I thread this particular guide is going to be very dependent on whether or not I have a thread break sensor installed and if I'm using that thread break sensor. So if I'm using my thread break sensor, I need to do my pre-wraps on this 3-hole guide. If I am not using a thread break sensor, like on Lenni right now, I would take my thread and I would stick it straight through from back to front on any of the 3 holes. I usually just use the bottom one, but over time that hole will eventually get cut because of the thread going through it, so you can use all 3 of them. You just would typically use them one at a time if you don't have a thread break sensor. If you do have a thread break sensor, you are going to use all 3 holes. So you're going to go in from the back, and then you would wrap around, so go around to the back again to go through the middle hole, and then around to the back one more time to get to the top hole. Okay, this would be for any polyester thread. You would do those 3 wraps. Your if I had a thread break sensor installed, it would be sitting right here, so the back wall of my thread break sensor would be just in front of this 3-hole guide. It would be a little black box sitting up here with a black wheel sticking towards me, and I would go underneath the wheel and go around the top. And you can go around those thread break sensors up to 5 times. Typically with glide thread, I'm going to be doing somewhere between 3 and 5 wraps around that wheel so that the wheel is not slipping. So if your thread break sensor is going off and it's just beeping steadily, that just means that that wheel's not turning. So we need to figure out why. So the first reason would be if you're using something like glide that is really, really slick, you would want to have at least 3 wraps. Like I said, sometimes I go up to 5 depending on the day. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and take the wraps out here so I only have 1 wrap because we don't have a thread break sensor and I am going to need to use this machine later today. And then the next place I'm going to go, I would go around the 3-hole guide or go around the thread break sensor if I was using it. Then I'm going to go to the 3-hole guide that is right in front of my handles. We're going to be threading the 3-hole guide that is right above your tension disc. So if I have my thread break sensor and it is wrapped, I'm going to come up and go in from the bottom of this first hole, right? And I'm not going to do any more wraps. I'm just going to go down through the last one. If I can get my thread to do it today, right? So if I was using a thread break sensor, I would just have a big running stitch up here that it would go down, and all I'm doing is using this to get the thread so that it's in the correct position directly above the post for your tensioner. If I'm using a thread break sensor, I'm going to come down through the top, wrap around, down through the top in the middle one, wrap around, and down through the top in the third one. So this is the trick. The whole trick between thread break sensor and not thread break sensor is where you put the 3 wraps. You either put it before the thread break sensor if you have a thread break sensor that you will be using, or you put it after, right above the tensioner if there is no thread break sensor. Okay, you can't put it in both ways because your thread break sensor cannot detect for you if you have tension before and after the thread break sensor. So I know it's a little confusing because of the way I just did this, but the whole trick behind this is up through the back, 1 hole of the 3-hole guide if you're not using a thread break sensor, and then you would have the wraps around the 3-hole guide right above the tensioner if you are not using a thread break sensor. The whole trick to having a thread break sensor or not having a thread break sensor, how you thread the machine. You need to have these 3 wraps. This is pre-tension on your thread. If you have a thread break sensor, that happens at the 3-hole guide right before the thread break sensor. If you don't have a thread break sensor, pre-tensioning happens at the 3-hole guide right above the tension disc. Okay, so that's the big difference in how you thread the machine with a thread break sensor or without one. So to put this, to get my thread to go through my tensioner, I always hold the thread behind this 3-hole guide, doesn't matter if it's a wrapped one or not, and I pull my thread hard so it comes up against the post of my tensioner, and then go backward and come back down and make sure I've got my tension spring. Once I have my tension spring, I'm going to go under the shepherd's hook, and I'm going to hold it there for a minute with my left hand and put my thread through my uptake lever with my right hand. The 3-hole guide on this machine would only be seen on Lenni and possibly Ellie and Larry. It is not on Lucy or on Freddie or Millie 30. They have a pigtail sitting right here. The reason that Lenni needs this 3-hole guide is we need the thread offset away from the light kit. So all we're using this 3-hole guide for in this case is to get the thread way far away from this sharp corner right here. It's not super sharp, but it's sharp enough it will cut your thread if it's not there. So you want to just put your thread through the very last hole of the 3-hole guide, And then the last thing you're going to do is use the pigtail. So if you've not used a pigtail before, you need to have some tension on the thread. And I just set it over my pigtail, and then I wrap the top part of it around the part that's sticking out, and it's threaded. We use them because they're quick to thread. So, and then you would obviously thread your needle and you would be ready to quilt. So to summarize, you want so we're going to summarize. Thread guide on the very back, the little U has to be over the spindle. We're going to, on the 3-hole guide that is the closest to your thread break sensor, you're going to be either going through just one of the holes if there's no thread break sensor, or if you're not using your thread break sensor at that moment, or you will go in through the bottom, wrap around, in through the middle, wrap around, in through the top, wrap around, and then go around your tensioner, or you will go in through the bottom, wrap around, in through the middle, wrap around, in through the top, and then out and around the thread break sensor wheel, the number of times you need for it not to slip on the thread you're using. Then you're going to come down to your 3-hole guide, and you're going to use a big running stitch if you have a thread break sensor. If you are not using the thread break sensor, you're going to do the wrap like you see on this one, which is down from the top, wrap around, down from the top in the middle, wrap around, and then down from the top, straight down into your tensioner. Make sure that you're holding it and flossing it way down against your post. You want to make sure that your backlash spring is actually springing. You're going to go under your shepherd's hook, go through the hole in your take-up lever, and then if you have a Lenni, you're going to go through the very outside hole of this 3-hole guide, and if you have one that has a pigtail, you're just going to go through the pigtail, right? And then everybody needs to use the pigtail right above, and then you thread your needle. It really is that easy to thread your machine. So as long as you know the tricks to do it, it's not hard, and it's going to help you balance your tension to have your machine threaded the correct way. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, press like on the video. We love comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Happy quilting.